Okay, so what's up? We're back and we're going to finish talking about our arrays here. So I have another example set up here. So I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing and then I'm going to delete it all and we're going to redo it. So as you can see, we have this little item that I made here and it just has these four kind of pillars on it. Then if I walk up, it gets a little highlight and says press E to place cube. So all we're going to be doing with this is we're going to be using an array that's going to find the closest spot to the player to spawn a cube on here. So you can see that if I start from over here and I just press E to place a cube, it's going to place one right in front of me. And then if I place another one, it picks the next furthest one and so on until all the spots have a cube on them. And then if I do the same thing, but I start over here, it's going to go down the list that way. And we can start from the middle and it will place the cubes according to the closest available spot to the player. So this could be something very practical that a lot of people might use. This could be something like if you have a weapon rack that you want to hang weapons up on, maybe a clothing rack, armor rack, anything like that. It's always going to find that closest spot to the player that's not currently filled and then do whatever you want to do there. So I'm going to just delete all this and then we'll start it over. Okay, so I'm just going to make a quick kind of pedestal thing like we had before here. I'm just going to throw a box in here. I'll throw a cylinder down too. So we're just going to do something like that. A little base with four pedestals. And if I go up to tools, I can do merge actors. If I click that, I can just throw this into, I'll just throw it into my, wherever. I'll just leave it here. I'll just name it my foundation and save it. And now that just gave me, that just merged all those actors into one static mesh. So now I can delete this that I made. I can go into my content row where I got that, and now I can pull this out. And now this is one mesh now. Okay, now I'm going to use this mesh in an actor. So I'm actually going to delete that, and we're going to make a new blueprint. So now I'm going to make a new blueprint to put this in. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make it a child of my interact blueprint so I can interact with it. So I did an interaction system before. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's a good interaction system. If you don't have it, then you just need a way to interact with this. So you could do it from an overlap or whatever. So I'm just going to go into where I have my interactables and then, so I have my base interact item here that we made in a previous video. So I'm going to right click on that and create a new child blueprint class. And then I'm just going to name this my second array test here. And I'm going to open that up. So now we're in our child's blueprint here. So all we have to do to add this to our interact system is click on the static mesh and add it here. So if I do control and space, that's going to bring up my content drawer. I can click on that static mesh there and then just click the little arrow. And now it's going to add that static mesh into our static mesh that we already have here. So I'm just going to save. And if you're following along from the interact system we did, we're almost done having an interactable item here. So we just have to connect our parent here and then override the base highlight, which is coming from our BP base interact item. And then we can just tell this whatever we want it to say. So for instance, I'll just do like a E to place cube. So now when I walk up to this, it should tell me press E to place cube. So let's throw this in the world and make sure that we're able to interact with it. So that's my second array test. We're going to throw that in here. And then there we go. So now it can highlight when we get close to it, unhighlight when we look away, and says press E to place cube. So now we're going to set up the logic that we have to do here. And I'm going to set some little cubes up on the top here to have them rotate. That way we can know when we're placing something. So I'm just going to go up to our default scene root and I'm going to add a cube in there. So we'll just do something like this. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate that cube, move it over to this one. I'm just going to make a few of these. Okay, so I got my 4 cubes that I'm going to make spin up here. So what I'm going to do is just set the visibility to this cube so that it's not visible on default. So we're just going to do that. So now we can interact with this item now. We have everything all set up that we need to do with it here. So now when we press interact, we want it to do something. So if you've been following along, then this item should be all set up with our blueprint interface because this is going to inherit everything from that BP parent item we have. So I can just call my interact pressed. And now whatever I want to have happen when I interact with this item, I have to be looking at it and press interact for this to fire. And then this will come to this item only. So we're going to make a couple functions for this. So let's start by making our array. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be setting the visibility and telling that cube to rotate when we place it. So instead of using a Boolean or an integer or a vector, I want this variable to be of the type static mesh component. because that's what these are here. That's what my cubes are. So I'm basically going to store these cubes in the array, and then we'll be manipulating that. So because when you highlight one of these, it says static mesh component there. When I go to type, I'm going to look for static mesh component and pick an object reference there. Now, when I do that, it goes up into my components tab here. That's our variable. We should probably rename that and say cube array. So now we have a variable that's of the type static mesh component. So I'm just going to right click on that, change it to an array, and we'll compile it. So now we have our array elements here. So now we have 0 array elements in here. So now this is something, I wanted to pick this example specifically because this was something that I couldn't figure out when I started, and once I started learning with arrays. So with something like a vector or a Boolean, you could just come in here and say, you want these to be true or false or whatever locations, and that's kind of what we did last time. If you're using anything that is a component like this, I can't just search for these specific components. They're not going to come up here. Okay, so I have to get these cube components inside of this array somehow. Okay, so there's a couple ways we can do this. I'm just going to show one of the ways here. So I'm going to make a new function, and I'm just going to call this set array. Okay, so in this function here, I'm going to get my cube array, drag that out, and we're going to do a set array element. So I'm going to connect that up. This is going to be index 0. So we have 4 cubes in here. So we're going to need index 0, 1, 2, and 3, which will give us 4 elements. So now it's asking for what item, and it's looking for a static mesh component object reference because we made our array of the type static mesh component. So the element that this array is going to hold is going to be a static mesh component here. So all I'm going to do is just grab my first cube here, which is just cube. We'll throw that in and connect that up. So now this array is going to know that this particular cube is an index 0 here. So what I want to do is click the size to fit here. Okay, so I'm going to grab this set array element, and we're going to need 4 of them here. So now I'm going to grab the next cube I have, which is my cube 1 here. And we're just going to plug that in. And then we need to change this from index 0 to now index 1. And then we're going to do that same thing for the rest of them. So I'm going to throw my cube 2 in, connect that up. And then this would be index 2. Cube 3, connect that up, index 3. So we're telling it to go into this array and set the array element inside of there. And the array element for index 0 is going to be cube. For index 1, it's going to be cube 1. Index 2 is going to be cube 2. And index 3 is going to be cube 3. So we'll have each one of these cubes be set as an element inside of this array here. And then I'm just going to return here. Okay, so this function is all set. So this is going to just set up our array to use here. And then what I'm going to do is on begin play, I want to call that. So we're just going to drag this off, put that there. So when this blueprint starts, it's going to set those elements that we're going to need. So now let's make our cube spin. So I'm going to make a custom event, and I'm just going to call this spin cubes. And I'm going to use a timeline for this. So I'm going to drag off and do add timeline. Okay, we can name it or not name it, doesn't matter. And then from here, we want to set a world rotation for this cube. So we're going to have to do this for all of our cubes. So if I just select all the cubes, bring them in, and we'll just do a set world rotation, and we plug that into our update. Okay, we want to make sure that all of our cubes are going into the target. And we're going to split this structure pin here so that we have access to the Z, which is our yaw. So if you want to tilt your cubes like I did in the little demo, you can input a whatever angles you want here. So I'm going to go back into the viewport really quick so we can see this. I'm going to turn the visibility back on for the cubes just so we can make sure that we get them spinning here. Now I'm going to go into the timeline. I'm going to say maybe like 3 seconds. I'm going to add a track and add a float track. And then the first one will be at time 0. We'll do value 0. If we look at our cube here and we look at the rotation's all at 0. So we're going to be changing the yaw. So it's starting at 0. So that's just where I'm starting my timeline at. So the value is going to be the rotation of this cube. So I'm going to click to add another float track. Because my animation is 3 seconds, I'm going to put 3 seconds is where I want this to end. And I'm going to do a value of, say 360. Press enter, and then if I hit these 2 little buttons, it'll zoom the timeline into the graph that we have. So again, my starting point is at time 0, value 0, and then the end point is at 3 seconds, which is what my animation's set at, or my timeline, and a value of 360. So then if I go to my event graph, now that gives me this new track 0, which I'm going to plug into the yaw. So now when we call this event, it should rotate all these cubes from this timeline. Now this is just going to rotate the cubes once and then they're going to stop. So what I'm going to do is come off of finished and I want to call this spin cubes again. So I can just grab the spin cubes event right from this list here, drop it onto finished. Because we're going to loop this when it's done, we're actually not going to use the play. We're going to do play from start. Otherwise, the timeline's going to try playing it from the end. It's not going to reset itself. So if we play from start, every time that fires, it'll restart it from 0 and then go to 360. So let's check that out. So then if we play, we have our cubes spinning and they're just going to keep spinning. So now we know that that event works. I'm going to make the visibility of these cubes be not visible again. So now we're going to make a function here. And this is going to be our find closest spot function. Okay, so we're going to end up using 2 arrays in here. We're going to use the array for the cubes that we made, but we're also going to use another array that's going to temporarily store information for us. I'm going to grab my cube array that we made, and we're going to loop through that. So I'm going to drag off the array, press F to get a for each loop here. Now, coming off this loop, I'm going to want to do a check. So I'm going to drag off here and we're going to do a branch. Okay, we're going to put that out there. What I want to do is check to see if this cube is visible. Okay, so I'm going to drag off and say is visible, and we'll get this node here that will return a Boolean to us. I actually want to reverse this, so I'm going to do a not Boolean, and then we're going to connect that into our branch here. I'm going to get a distance from the player to this element right here. So what I want to do is get the world location of this element. So this element is going to be our cube. So I'm going to drag off. I'm going to get world location there. Now I also need the location of the player too. So I'm going to get player character, and then I'm going to drag off this and get actor location. We need a distance vector now. So if I just drag off and do distance, you'll see distance vector comes up. And there's just a v1 and a v2. So it's asking for 2 vectors here. So we're just going to plug them in. And now it's going to output the distance here from this location to this location. And that's where our second array is going to come in here. So I'm going to add a new variable, and we're just going to make this a float. But I'm going to call this my distance. And we're going to change it to a float, and we're going to make sure it's an array. I want that array to match however many elements we have in our cube array. So we have 4 cubes in our cube array. So I'm going to select our distance array here, and I'm just going to give it 4 elements. We're going to grab that array, and we want to set the array element here. I'm going to come off true here, and I want to feed in the index that we're looping through. So whatever index we're looping through here, we're getting the distance that that cube is to the character. And then we want to store that in the same index number in the distance array we just made. So I'm going to connect the array index from our cube array and pass that into our distance array here. And the element that we're going to feed in is going to be that distance. So we made this a float because this is returning a float to us. So I'm going to plug that in there. So what we're doing is we're looping through and we're checking each one of the cubes in this array here. And we're seeing if it's visible. If the cube is not visible, then that means we haven't placed it yet. So we want to come out of true, and we want to get the distance to that cube. Now, if the cube is visible, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this set array element and just throw it down here. And we're going to plug the false into here. Connect the array up, and we're also going to want to bring that index number down. So we're going to plug that in. So these are going to look like they're set up the same. The only difference is instead of taking this distance from here, so remember, this is if the cube is visible. So if we already made a cube visible, then we don't want to place a cube where there already is one. So what I'm going to do is set this value to something high, like we'll just do 9999. So this will be something way further than any of the other cubes will be. So if there is a cube that's already visible, it means we already placed it there. So now when I'm making my distance array, I don't really want the actual distance to it because we're not going to be putting anything in that spot because something's already there. So I'm just going to set that to something really big so that it puts it at the end of my distance list. So this should be pretty much all set. We have one last thing we have to do though, is now we have that information stored in this variable here. So we want to use it. I'm going to come off the completed pin here and we're going to return, and we're going to pass something out with this return. So I'm going to add a return node on there. So now once we're done looping, so we're going to loop through our 4 cubes. If any of them are not visible, we're setting the distance from us to the cube in this distance array. If any of them are visible, it means we already placed them. So I'm just giving it a far distance so that it's going to be put at the end of my array when I put them in order by distance here. So now I'm going to grab that distance array and I'm going to drag off and do minimum, and it's right there, minimum of float array. So then what this is going to do is just, it's going to find the minimum value that's in this array. So it doesn't matter what's in here, it's going to return the minimum value. So it's actually going to return the minimum value. So if you needed to know the actual distance, you can get that here. Or it's going to return the index of the minimum value. So we're going to use the index. Okay, so I'm going to drag off my cube array here and we're going to do a get. And you can see we have get copy right there. So I'm going to put this over here. And now it's asking me which index do I want to get from this? And we're going to pick this index. This index is going to be the closest item to us. So that's the cube that we want to get. The closest one that's not visible. And then we're going to take this return of this. This is going to be our cube component here. And we're going to drop this on the return node. So that should be the cube that is not yet visible and the closest to us. So now this function is done and made. Now, so when we press interact, we want to run that and find the closest spot. So we can just drag that function out. And you can see we have that output pin we made. So this is going to be the cube that we want to set the visibility on. But before we do, we just want to do a branch and just do a quick check here. So I'm going to drag off, do branch. We're going to check to see if this cube is visible. Because once we get to the end of our array, once they're all visible, we don't want to keep trying to turn them visible. If they're already visible, we want to stop it. So once all of them become visible, if the closest spot to us is already visible and there's no other spot, then we're just going to say, I'm going to do a print and we'll say all spots full. But if it's not visible, then what we're going to do is set visibility on it. So I'm going to drag off this, which is our cube, and we're going to set visibility. So that's going to come off our false there. And we'll set the new visibility. We'll make sure that's checked. So let's see how that works here. So if we jump in, highlight it, we're right here, and there we go. We press E to place cube. So first cube comes up, and then if I stay right here, second cube will come up, third cube, and fourth cube. And then if we come in from the other way, and we do place, 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 they're all working. And then if we start kind of in the middle here, where we can maybe see all 4 of these, place, 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 and place. So that's always going to find the closest to the player and put the cube. Now, in this example, I just made these cubes part of this blueprint, but you could also use that to spawn a cube or spawn an item or whatever you want to do. But the logic is there. This, like I said, this could be used for a lot of things, hanging weapons up on a rack, hanging armor up. And this was just a different way of using an array to where it's not just a vector or a Boolean or something like that. I don't think I tried printing to make sure that it's going to recognize when they're all filled here. So let's try that. We'll go in, there's 3, 4, and then now if I try and place a 5th one, it should say, nope, all spots are full. So at this point, it's if you were spawning cubes in, it's not going to keep spawning them. It's not going to spawn one in the same place of a cube. It's going to know, nope, all the spots are full. We're not doing anything. So if there's any questions with the arrays or anything, let me know. You can always leave comments in the video or come join my Discord, hit me up. We can chat that way. But I think that's going to be it for now. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.